All right, thank you very much for coming. So before I start, just to let everyone know, some of my slides have some detail. Don't worry, I will share everything after my talk, so there'll be a link and you can download whatever you like. But some of it gets pretty detailed. Don't worry about the detail. I'm going to try and point out everything that I think is really important and what I want to illustrate. So to start off, how many people have read continuous delivery in the room? Cool, fair number of people. How many people are from, let's say, larger organizations, more than 100 people? Great, okay. How many people would consider themselves in like a leadership position? They have like direct reports and individual contributors. Good, okay, good mix, awesome. Well, I'll try to take all that into consideration as I target this material. So continuous delivery came out, and at the time I was a build and release engineer and working for a software company in kind of an interesting situation. Two co-founders, one of them had never heard of Agile before in their entire lives, couldn't care less, and the other hated Agile with a passion. Like, you could never bring it up in a conversation or else it was just a rant for like 3 hours, and you would just try and retreat into the shadows again. And I was kind of in the middle as a build and release engineer. I was just spending my time running around chasing people to fix merge conflicts because we were running on SVN at the time. I don't know if anyone remembers those days. Anybody on SVN? Condolences. You're building character. That's what I told myself. So continuous delivery was big for me. You know, it really sort of shone a light and inspired me to think of different ideas that I couldn't quite implement in my daily life. They weren't really making a huge difference for me, but kind of setting me in a direction of thinking in that way and thinking of things more continuously. And I show Lost in the Barrens here because that's really how I felt at the time under this circumstance. And Farley Mowat came to mind because, you know, Dave Farley, I made that connection in my head and it like never went away. And this is kind of like a classic Canadian story that deals with some common themes with how I felt at the time. Mainly, there's man versus nature, and for me it was kind of like human versus human nature. There were cross-cultural relationships, and this idea that we're coming of age. And I was learning a lot about how to talk to people about improvement, how to try and improve things in organizations, but this was 2010, and I really didn't know a lot, and I've learned a lot through trial and error that I kind of want to share with everybody here. So fast forward to 2014, and me thinking I was a smart person, I was working for a consulting company, and we would go to clients and prospects and we would show them, here's what a pipeline could look like. Here are all the moving pieces, because the goal at that point was to raise awareness about what was possible. And we're kind of trying to do our part to shine a light on things that might be interesting, might help people think in a specific way, but still not really guiding them towards any improvement specifically. We'd still have to have a discussion about, okay, what if this seems like it resonates with you? What do you think we should pursue? And here's some recommendations from us, right? There was really no recipe to follow towards improvement. We could just sort of show these examples and say like, what do you think, right? Or here's what we think might work for you. And there's pieces incorporated here where there's automation and manual steps, and it's sort of a mishmash of everything. But the idea was just to show this picture to people and start a conversation. So if we fast forward again to 2018, 4 years later, I'd now been through the ringer with a startup. We hit Series A, we had enterprise clients, and we had all kinds of issues trying to communicate, here's how we would like to do things. We're kind of coming up with these ideas ourselves, starting from scratch, building pipelines and building all this automation and making those decisions. And it was very challenging to sort of get on the same page about what should this look like? We can make any decision we want. How many people need to be involved? How long should it take to make a decision? What direction should we set off in? And at some points, in a leadership position, what does everything look like, right? You kind of have to keep track of your surroundings and pay attention so that you make the right decision on which direction should we go. And I started thinking about value streams as a way to do this, and I encountered them earlier in my career with some education in like business and tech, but just sort of forming these ideas, and it started to come around. Now, 2018, 2019, I was at the DevOps Enterprise Conference at the end of last year, and Nationwide shared this story, and this 2.5% is an interesting number. How many people have an idea of what that might relate to? Yeah, it could be anything. Who knows? The 2.5% is actually how much time their engineers got to spend on writing code out of all their time. Amazing. Like, how amazing is that? Also amazing is that the industry average is 15%. I got that stat from John Cutler, another person who talks about how much time is wasted in teams who are just trying to build stuff on a regular basis. And I've been fascinated by that because I think, we talk about a lot of ways to improve, and really if we can just like get rid of all the stuff that's wasting time, we could take that time and put it towards doing whatever we want. So that was beginning of 2018 for Nationwide. End of 2018, they started this improvement journey where they saw their release time shrink from 3 years down to 3 months, which is pretty amazing. And what made the difference was this focus on value streams, this focus on what does the big picture look like and where are we wasting most of our time? Where are the risks and opportunities if we step back and we look at what's happening to us, end to end, together? And I think, the thinking in value streams and this idea of making a map really helps frame conversations and frame our improvement efforts in different ways that other tools and techniques really don't do. And they kind of focus in their own areas, but I've found that thinking in terms of value streams and value stream mapping really drives this opportunity for improvement and gets people on the same page. So one thing that I think is missing from a lot of conversations is this idea of what are our surroundings? Where are we right now? What do things look like right now? And then where should we go? Considering our surroundings, where should we go? If we know that we're surrounded by rakes, obviously we want to think twice about taking a step in any direction, to make a Sideshow Bob reference. But how we should get there, right? Should we jump over the rakes? Should we try and move the rakes out of the way? Becomes very relevant because now we're aware of what's happening and our next decision can be informed. I think as an industry, we spend a lot of time on compasses and not enough on maps. And let me explain what I mean. We have a lot of guiding lights, guiding principles, good examples. We have frameworks, we have maturity models. I built a thing called the DevOps checklist in 2014 that was basically a compass. It was just saying, here's a list of things, and you can fill it out and see what things you haven't filled out. But it didn't tell anyone, here's the next thing that you should do, given your circumstance. And it really just served as this sort of guiding light. And we have the 4 key metrics, right? We have Netflix, we have everyone is using Kubernetes. These are guiding principles that don't tell you anything about what you should do next, right? With any kind of fidelity, considering your surroundings. And the idea of mapping, I've heard basically every talk that I've been to today talk about this idea of mapping and how important it is to see what our current surroundings are. And I think that is an underserved aspect of our industry. We hesitate to draw these pictures, partially because it's uncomfortable, because you shine a light on all the mess, but it's not something that we often talk about. And there's not a lot of structure and frameworks that you can follow if you want to do that. But I see value stream mapping as one of those things. So I'll get into the details about how I see that coming together and how I think we can make that accessible to people. So really when we start, most teams, they have very messy situations, which is normal, and I see this all the time. If we're drawing a flow chart of what our current processes look like, they often look more like this than what you'll see in a wiki, right? Like how many people have a document in a wiki that's this beautiful flow chart that has nothing to do with reality whatsoever, right? Oftentimes we have these sprints that are full of all these uncomfortable activities that happen, and we don't talk about them because they're not in the wiki. We don't have any rituals that are meant to scrutinize what we're doing, and we don't have a healthy dialogue around what's not working, what should we tackle. We have retrospectives, but where's the sort of visual aspect of that gets everybody on the same page, right? A retrospective is often a bunch of sticky notes that point out specific things that people don't like, things that we can do better, but there's no shared image of what's going on right now. What does it look like? So oftentimes when I work with a team, they have, don't worry about the detail here if it's hard to see, but they have a very complex situation, and we can't just dive into any specific thing right off the bat. So we start really high, and this is on the idea that we can start at the portfolio steering level and then dig in, right? So start wherever you want, but starting high means that we can get this high-level view and make a good decision about where we want to focus our energy. So when you look at this high-level stream, oftentimes we'll say, well, obviously, it's the change advisory board is killing us, and we should just not have change advisory. How many people think that's the right way to go? A couple of huge fans shot right up. And yeah, that might be a thing that you could do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the best decision for us to make right now. And we kind of really have to dig into the details to find out whether our hypothesis is correct and whether we really should be focused on killing the cab or finding some way to automate decisions or qualify the regulatory compliance that we have or obligations, right? Before we look at the details and we look at the data, it's really hard to make that argument without any confidence, and then sell that to whoever. If you wanted to kill your change advisory board, taking it to the change advisory board and saying hey guys, we would like you to go away, is a hard sell, right? Unless you have something compelling to bring them and say, can we agree that this is the right way to go? So what I want to illustrate here is just this idea of digging and digging and digging until we get to a level where it's worthwhile to collect some data because we're going to get some really specific results. And at this level, let's say, we have our staging deploy, right? Oftentimes, what I'll hear teams say is, we need automated deployment. And they'll come to me and they'll say, we want to make the case for automated deployment, which is kind of a backwards way of doing things, but it's easy for me to say, well, do you want to be sure or do you want to just do it? Because you're asking me because you probably want to be sure, and so we can look at it together and we can figure out whether or not that's the best use of our time. So I'm highlighting these two areas in red because they're taking up a massive amount of time relative to every other step in the process, right? So we're looking at the process start to finish, this segment that we want to analyze, highlighting opportunities that may or may not be worth looking at. But at least we have data that points us to analyzing these two candidates. And you'll notice that we've got 11 hours, 20 hours. Relative to the rest of the pipeline, this is huge. These are huge portions of the pipeline here. And there could be any number of reasons why these are taking so long. right? But we've got some hot spots that are popping out to us, and now we know where we might be able to focus our attention. And we can agree that these two things are popping out at us, right? It's easy to have that discussion. On the other hand, artifact deploy, 15 minutes. It's not too challenging to have a conversation with everybody involved and say, can we agree that 15 minutes is lower than 11 hours, right? That's a more compelling case than a battle of opinions, right? Or two people with different roles shouting over each other, or having to come to a consensus. All of a sudden we have data to support our opinions. So that brings us back to 11 hours, 20 hours. Who knows which one we should tackle? It's a good question because the answer, as always, is it depends. You never lose saying it depends. That's a cheat for you. If I leave you with nothing else from this talk, it's a superpower. So 11 hours, 20 hours. Obviously, 20 hours is more than 11 hours, but what if every time we hit smoke testing, we fail and we get sent back, right? If our environment creation step is failing multiple times, all of a sudden we're looking at 22 hours, 33 hours versus 20 hours. So we can have that discussion by bringing people into the room and saying, what do you think about this? Does this accurately reflect reality? Or is there anything that we're not capturing here? And there's layers that we can add to this that will help us reveal those opportunities. You can add things like artifacts that are created at each step, people involved, what percentage of each step is creating value and what value is created by each step. But for the purposes of illustration, I want to keep this really simple, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information later on. So I think this really puts us in a position of having great conversations about where should we be focusing our attention. Can we all agree on focusing in a specific place? Even if we eventually do both, we know which one to start with under our current surroundings, our current situation. So in contrast, if we look at pipelines, and we talk about pipelines all the time. Pipelines are super easy to talk about. They're very sexy. There's a lot of vendors who have solutions for pipelines, so we tend to talk about them a lot. The problem is, the only thing that really gets covered in pipelines is the pieces that are already automated, right? If we're talking about the pieces that are already okay, even if they could be better, we're missing the massive opportunities that live in this cloudy piece that's not in the automation, that's not in the tool. And that's usually, your meetings with 20 people that last 4 hours and you leave and you're like, why did we even do this, right? Or like handing work to someone who's on vacation and it just sits in their inbox, or someone who never picks up something in Jira. Like, there's all kinds of manual stuff that doesn't show up in your pipeline, even if you might know it started now and it ended at this point, but it's a cloud in between. We're not in a good situation to make a decision about how to improve that, right? Unless we're looking at this in terms of it's not just automation that we want to tackle. Really, the biggest opportunities are the things that are not automated, right? So to illustrate this a different way, I see a pipeline as a piece in between the start and the end of a value stream. A value stream is really, we have some kind of raw material, whether it's an idea, a request from a customer, an incident that needs to be solved, and then a solution that gets delivered to your customers, right? Looking at that boundary, a pipeline is a piece, right? And this is where everybody focuses all of their attention, missing what happens at the edges. And I think we need ways of tackling the pieces at the edges in order to make those big gains that are honestly really easy to do. You don't have to automate anything to have more efficient meetings. You do have to know that your meetings are, let's say, worthy of improvement or candidates for improvement, to put it diplomatically, in order to improve them, right? If we're only focused on improving our efficiency in the pipeline, then we're missing all these low-hanging fruit opportunities on the edges. So if we're looking at a value stream, a high-level explanation of a value stream, start, delivered, the real pieces that matter the most, and I think the kind of 80% of the value for 20% of the effort is this timing piece. And that's where we get measurement from. Because a lot of people will illustrate a process, and I just realized I'm now using the American pronunciation all the time. I used to go back and forth. I used to say process. So we have step time, wait time. That's going to give us this layer of information on top that allows us to make these decisions about where is our time being eaten up. And in a value stream, we're capturing, it's not a shrimp, by the way. Now you can't unsee it. But, so we have manual steps, we have timing, and we have our automation all represented together. So we can now have a conversation about everything that's going on. And we have to constrain this a little bit because we don't want to be talking about a million pieces. I've heard of people do value stream maps for 2,000 steps in a bank. And it's like, great, we're done. We never want to look at that again. And I never want to do it again, right? You kind of have to focus, and that's why I talk about drilling down. You want something that's easy to chew on and easy to talk about. But at least we're representing measurement, and that helps us make decisions. So another great thing is that now that we have measurement involved, we can start capturing things like our 4 key metrics in context of a value stream. And we can have conversations about how is our lead time affected by this? How does this change? If we were to make this change, how would it affect our mean time to recovery? And so a couple examples that I want to go into. It doesn't immediately pop out, but by looking at the metrics, we can see obviously 2 weeks here in the waiting stage between whether we make a decision to do something and it ends up in the backlog. That's a great candidate to focus on. Why is it taking 2 weeks, right? We don't want to worry about the 2 weeks of discovery because that's creative work. We might want to constrain it, we might not. But the easy opportunity is this 2-week waiting time, right? It's probably pretty easy to get rid of that if we figure out why is this held up for 2 weeks. Another example, this is a software delivery pipeline from one of my clients. Opportunities here. We have a bunch of wait time, 2 weeks at each stage, because things are handed off probably from one individual to another individual, and somebody goes on vacation and all of a sudden it's held up, right? Or it goes to the back of a queue and it doesn't get tackled for 2 weeks. But we can look at it, right? We can have a conversation as a team about it. These question marks at the end, marketing and support. So we had everybody in the room drawing out the value stream map, nobody from success or support, and then all of a sudden, we get to the end and I'm asking, okay, what happens next? And everyone's like, well, I guess it goes to success or something, and which is great, right? Because now we can highlight that. Now we know we should probably figure out what happens here, because I'm sure they don't like having everything thrown at them at the end of the cycle and said, like, you guys have 12 hours now to build all the support materials, take all your screenshots, schedule a webinar, and release all this stuff, right? If we want to be moving upstream, if we want to be shifting things left, all of a sudden we've highlighted opportunities of things that we can pull and how that affects the value stream. From a high level, as an illustration, I really think that value stream mapping is this improvement on visibility, measurement, and gives us this dialogue about what to improve in a way that we can all sort of agree on it, right? We can all sit in a room and have really constructive conversations instead of, well, this company's doing this, or everyone is doing this, or, I read a book and it said to do this, right? It's responding to your current surroundings and your current situation, and I think that's really powerful. So sort of to wrap this up, I think it's super important that this is relevant data to you. It's relevant to your team with whatever group of people you assemble. And as far as group goes, it's anybody who has a dog in the fight, but also anybody who complains about a process, right? Anyone who's affected, anyone who is interested can be part of this, or they can follow along. they get a picture at the end of it, even if they're not in the meeting, they can see what happened, and they can disagree with it, or they can have input. But you're building something that really doesn't take too much effort. It takes a little bit of visibility and time, but you get something that everyone can talk about, and it's relevant to you. You don't have to talk about, Netflix is doing this, so we have to do it. It's accessible because I don't know if anyone, how many people have seen a value stream map? Like a traditional, okay, cool. You did your homework before coming, or you're fans. I love you either way. But a traditional value stream map, how many people love the way that value stream maps look and think they're super readable? I think they're awful, and they work for manufacturing. They work for where they came from. Like, they've been around for 100 years, and that's kind of why they don't really work for software. They don't really work for agility. They don't really work for accessibility, because they're meant to speak to people who have training in Six Sigma, and they've gone to school to read a picture. I don't think that's necessary. So my approach is basically, let's make it look as simple as possible, but including the data that's valuable to make decisions. And you can layer on as much complexity as you want, but it's not necessary to get the bulk of the benefit from it. So I really encourage people to make these as accessible as possible. And the whole exercise is very collaborative. It's very inclusive. You know, it really doesn't hurt to get a bunch of people in a room and ask them, you know, what's going on, what happens, what do things look like right now. You know, it can be a team building exercise. And I've done sessions where there's people in the room who have never talked to each other, but they're part of the same value stream, right? And that even the act of doing the exercise, they have this sense of empathy for everybody else involved. They now understand who's affected downstream. They now understand what has to happen by shifting left in order to make their lives easier. And we can all have a conversation about, if I just had this, I could do this faster. Or if this was just automated, what can we do to automate this, right? So you've got success people in the same room as engineers, and all of a sudden you can solve problems like you'd never believe. And then I think most of all, it's actionable, and that's like incredibly valuable, because we can all read a book, we can all look at what another company's doing, and it doesn't tell us how to get there or what our next decision should be. And I think drawing a value stream map really helps us do that. So back to this, you know, I think this has its place. I think it's good for starting conversations, but it's not actionable, it's not really relevant, and I think that's what we need more of at this stage. And this could be, you know, my brain on value streams, but I see these everywhere. Everywhere through an organization. I really think that businesses are just a collection of value streams, whether or not they're serving internal customers or external customers. Things like, for example, if we look at, this is a example case of customer onboarding, and it's different for every organization. But there's a lot of opportunities to tweak very specific pieces here that don't happen because people don't think of it as a living organism, like a really important part of our infrastructure, in the same way that we think of a pipeline as an important part of our infrastructure. And I think as we treat everything as a value stream, and we treat these processes as equals and valuable and part of our business, we start to take these things seriously, which means we get more out of our employees. All of a sudden, you know, people can be productive sooner. You might notice that at no stage in this value stream is anything pushed to production, which I think is pretty common, right? It's very rare to have companies where you're pushing to production on your first day. And even when you do, sometimes it's just like, let's just check the box so that we feel like we've done our onboarding, right? But as we treat this as a value stream, we're really focused on what is the value that we're aiming to get. You know, it's not to ship something to production, it's to ship value to our customers. And so what you'll see as you move from a current state to a future state, the sort of next phase of value stream mapping, is that you will parallelize some of these things, and some of these get automated. So you'll have things happening at the same time. And you'll notice that we are pushing to production now. So looking at the current state means that we can have a conversation about what is it going to take to make this better? What would it look like if it was better? And we can co-design that together. And everybody sort of gets the chance to have input on that. So if I can leave with anything, I really want to leave you with this idea that I think starting where we are is the really important piece to all of this. And it's not based on anyone else's company principles. It's not based on benchmarks. It's not based on metrics. It's really, what are you surrounded with right now? And then how do you make that step and not get lost in the Barrens as I once was, as I sometimes feel. But that's it for me. You could snap that if you want. The link is there for a bunch of more information and to get in touch with me. But thank you very much. It's been a
Hello. So I think one of the interesting things that you mentioned is identifying the right problem to work on, which I 100% agree with. But then kind of another challenge that I tend to see teams go through is figuring out how do we actually address that, which can be its own ball of wax, right? Like, how do you figure out which things do you want to custom build in order to accelerate them? Which things do you want to outsource to accelerate them, right? Like, that kind of feels like a different axis than the actual value chain itself is which directions do you push things in order to make them more efficient. Kind of, I'm curious what you think about how to improve that process.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll let you. I can't take it. I had my.
We don't trust you.
Yeah. Nor should you. Nor should you. It's a great question. I really think that it depends on what your surroundings are. Again, like it's what I always try and pair with the value stream definition is capability mapping. So, what are the things that we're doing right now? What is our skill level? Do we have adequate staffing for that so that you can make an informed decision of like, if we were to develop this in-house, do you think we have the chops to pull it off? Or, do we obviously not have the capability to execute on this? So we could bring it to a vendor and say, maybe this is an opportunity to bring in someone outside. I think by having the value stream map, you can really have a constructive conversation with people on the team and also with vendors. So on the team side, you could say, given all the things that you could be working on and having it be very visual and obvious to people, do you really want to be spending time on this, like custom building this in-house? Or you could bring that to vendors and say, here's the piece of the puzzle that we're trying to solve in the context of how it fits with everything else. And so all of a sudden, they've got a better understanding of what you're looking for. And I think that drives up the odds of success either way. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody else have a challenge? Go ahead.
Hey, Steve. That was a great presentation. I could relate so much to what we are doing in my company with the adoption of DevOps. Really didn't use the concept of value stream as a tool, but after listening to your talk, realized, oh, that's what we were doing all the time. So I think my question is around when you say that in IT, in an organization, there can be multiple value streams, and there can be handoffs in how you have defined those processes. So one of the challenges that I'm running into is how you organize your people around work, not work around people, and how you prioritize and get people to the alignment that there is a common roadmap, that there is management tools. So what would you like to suggest around that?
I think there's a couple of encouraging patterns that we're now seeing in the industry, like things like this migration from projects to products, and people really taking the idea of each piece of the organization and treating it as a product with its own customers and its own deliverables, its own process that needs to be taken seriously just as if it was being delivered to customers. And I think that's really encouraging, but I think we still have a long way to go before that is common practice. And I think there's a lot of discipline and tooling that needs to happen to facilitate that that kind of practice so that it just becomes easy to work and think that way. But I think that will make the big difference.
So I'm a huge fan of the process. One of the challenges I've had is getting the actual right people in the room. Because, I mean, in my experience, it needs to be the person that's doing the work, not the person that supposedly understands what the work is, because they don't. I mean, how do you get the people in the room that are actually doing that step so that you have an accurate map at the end?
That's a great question.
I think that's one of the challenges that leads developer advocates to exist, right? At least in the developer tool space, because you need to get people to understand what are the challenges people are facing and get them in front of the people who are developing solutions, right? That you have to build those connections rather than treating it as, oh, the product manager intermediates all of that, right? Like then you get a disconnect between requirements, value chains, and what's actually being produced.
So is there a good 101 sort of entry into this that you can provide to others that aren't here to say, this is why we need to do it?
Do you want to open it to the group first?
We can post.
So the experience that we had in my company, by building a value stream, a big map of how the dots connect between your software development and software delivery lifecycle, it led us to, instead of arguing and having different opinions that my tool is better than yours in this vertical of IT, we banded together, we sat for hours and hours and tried explaining each other. So the value streaming exercise helped us lead to building that vision, the North Star vision towards, okay, it's not about tools, it's not about your opinions or my opinions, it's about, what can be those swim lanes if you think about a project manager roadmap. Are you going to look into different tools for orchestration? Are you going to look into different tools for change management and blah, blah? So how I was mentioning, the concept is very cool, and we realized that we were doing it all the way with the adoption of DevOps, which helped us build the North Star vision. So, yeah.
Question or follow-up comment?
I just answered that one. Hi. So some of the best success I've seen with making this work visible is being able to bring in leadership to look at that value stream and see how long things are actually taking, because they had no idea. And it's most satisfying when you see the jaw completely drop, and then it evolves into obtaining sponsorship, leadership, business sponsorship to start funding experiments on how to optimize the flow, identifying where the bottleneck is and recognizing that it doesn't do any good to invest in an area where there's no bottleneck. So.
Hey, Dominica, follow up if you don't mind. How do you get people to focus on wait time and not just active time?
How do we get people to focus on wait time?
A lot of times it's the wait time, not the active, not the whip, but the...
Yeah, so one thing we do is show flow efficiency, which is the ratio of work time versus wait time. And when you look at those numbers across different sectors in the industry, that it's the wait time. We spend so much time trying to estimate things to be perfectly, when it doesn't really matter when most of the time is spent in a wait state. And so when people can start to see through the metrics that what we're waiting on is work that is sitting in an idle state, then bringing the emphasis, well, how, because people complain, this is how we really do it. What are people complaining about? Things take too long. Okay, how long do they really take? And if it took 10 days, how much of that 10 days was actually sitting in a wait state? And that usually starts to open up some eyes.
Just to quickly talk about successes, like before I started doing the whole whiteboard thing, as I was working more in this direction, at my last organization, we had this case where we would onboard our new clients. and we'd have to get a bunch of data from them. We'd have to have a bunch of meetings. There was a lot of back and forth. And we were still sort of like baking this process and making it real. But we realized, it's taking 4 weeks, 6 weeks to happen. And our roadmap is for us to onboard another like 50 customers before the end of the year, right? And you start to see, okay, well, if I do that math at the top of my head, it's never going to happen. We're going to burn everybody out trying to do it. But what we did was we actually just put the steps, we put a value stream into Google Sheets, and we just put every step and the measurements, and that guided the entire team towards tackling the bottlenecks, and all of a sudden we could see, here's where the handoffs are, here's where the wait time is, here's where the meetings are taking too long, or we have 3 weeks of scheduling before we sit down and do something, and it cut it down from 4 weeks to 4 days.
That's a comment on two of them earlier. One of them was, how do you know when you have the right people in the room? I knew that I had my first value stream success when the QA tester stood up in the middle of a value stream overview and went, "That's not how it's done." Yeah. And told his boss that his boss was completely wrong about how we did fundamental operations. And we had a very good discussion over that one. And the other success that we had was we started breaking it down where anytime there was a queue or a person, we put a stick figure or an email instead of the normal value stream to say, like, we don't have a wait time. This is a step. This isn't waiting. This is a step. And this has an almost indeterminate value because if you're at the end of the queue, we don't know how long it's going to take. So instead of like drawing the wait time on the arrows in between boxes, I broke them out and made them into boxes, and I said, there's a person here. So we have a bus factor of 1 and a wait time, right? So it was seeing all that stuff drawn out on a whiteboard in front of them where people went, oh, I had no idea that any of this was even happening, and that's, to me, that was the biggest success because we immediately went, well, how do we get rid of that? It was everybody in the room.
Very nice. Thank you. Headlands, then Sophie.
One of the interesting things is that similar to your story about, we have 50 new clients to onboard, there's a fantastic thing, a talk by Max Loebe of Google Cloud, where he talks about Google Cloud needing to turn up something like 20 new cloud regions in the span of a year, and realizing that they just could not do it, that each cloud turn up was taking 4 months in order to turn up a single region. And similar to your Excel sheet, right? Like it was literally a markdown file, like listing all the steps that turned into automation of, even if it's just email someone and they click the button when they're done, right? Then you get the statistics that way. It doesn't have to be fancy drawing on a whiteboard. You just need like the list of steps to start with. And then you can reduce the cycle time and turn up 50 cloud regions or whatever.
Thank you. Thanks for that talk on value stream mapping. It obviously makes a lot of sense as an engineer, as a DevOps person. I know GoCD has it. I just want to voice perhaps what is obvious is there's a tool, there's a hammer, not everything is a nail. So if your problem isn't the optimization of a reasonably well understood process where people can reasonably disagree about value add time and non-value add time, maybe this is not the right tool for you. Here's an example, just talked about it, and something that's close to my heart. If you are building the wrong product because you don't have the right voices in the room, because you don't have diversity, what value stream map will you choose to create to say how to optimize that? You might create the wrong one, saying, hey, we're not hiring the right people. I can tell you from experience that's going to get you to optimize on the wrong thing. So it's a hammer, and not everything is a nail.
So continuing the discussion, what magic tools, what magic wand do we want to make wave to get better tooling or better processes in the value stream mapping space in the next 2 to 5 years? Thoughts?
So I would love to see more organizations on their journey from project to product, because if organizations are focused on business outcomes by product, then you start to see work being brought to the people instead of people being brought to the work. When we bring people to the work, we break them up. As they move from one project to another project, because people really aren't these fungible resources. If we bring the work to the people, then we can keep long-term, long-standing teams who know that product inside and out, people who are responsible for the design, the development, the delivery, and the operation of that product, and we can keep them together over the long haul. And the focus becomes more on business outcomes instead of this triangle with project management and the red, yellow, green reports, or as we said earlier in the keynote today, the watermelon reports.
So I'd love to find a way to make the map itself more visible to everybody, because I mean, one of the most important things is you set a baseline and then you have to measure your improvement and see it. And if we really want small incremental change, that's not obvious. Like you don't see your own pets and children growing up. Somebody else comes back and says, "Oh, they've gotten so much bigger." It's like, didn't notice. I would like a way that the entire stream was visible to everybody in the team, so when they do their work, they see the incremental improvements.
So I'm going to call out privilege here. There's a tool called Runbook. And it's an interesting tool. It's it's Ruby. It's meant for more configuration management orchestration space. But the process it starts with is document everything in a to-do list, and then you can worry about it. So we're talking about meta-analysis of what are we doing company-wide, organization-wide on this stuff. But as far as an interesting example, I just wanted to call that out because I think it starts to go in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I think to echo what Ken said, I think what's kind of missing at this stage is we have a lot of tooling that's focused on the automated pieces, the pieces that are already solved. And the gap that I see is like capturing in a data-centric way what's outside of your automation, what's not, like what is the bleeding neck wound that should be addressed. It's probably not the pieces that are automated, it's probably the meeting. So how do you instrument for meeting starts, meeting ends, all that data gets collected. We have 3 days to schedule a phone call. Like right now, the tooling doesn't really support this stuff that's really a problem. It's kind of focused on what's already automated because that's the easy stuff to hook up.
Honestly, I think we are reinventing a lot of things that are found in other fields, so I would like us to listen to other disciplines. For instance, librarians. We should be hiring librarians. We should be hiring anthropologists. And that, honestly, is what will solve our problems for the next 2 to 5 years.
Specific examples. Any specific examples of techniques you've seen in those spaces?
I think in terms of librarians, I think it's really important to catalog what you already have and to curate it and to decide what's meaningful, right? And I think that kind of process documentation can fall out of people understanding what exists and surfacing it. And I think as far as anthropology, we see a lot of people from user experience research who are anthropologists, right? Who actually can interview you and understand and get those aha moments of, hey, that process didn't work the way you think it does.
Excellent. I think we're...
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Liz is saying. So something I think we often forget in technology is that we've created an echo chamber where all we know is tech. All we care about and all we pay attention to is tech. Look at the aerospace industry, okay? We started off building airplanes. That's cool, but how did they get so successful? How did they get to where they needed to be? Take a look at trees. Okay, they started to approach greater speeds and velocities, and ran into rigidity problems. Right, we had these super solid structures, and then the planes were cracking apart and breaking. They couldn't figure it out. What they do? They saw these trees bending and waving. Right, they looked to nature. We got to stop thinking only about tech and look at the rest of the universe to kind of get new ideas and solve real problems. Because, like you said, a lot of these things are already solved long ago.
Plus one to what Liz said about borrowing from other fields. So on that question of librarians, taxonomy and ontology, absolutely look at how people categorize the world. The periodic table, still the best categorization ever in the universe of anything. Be humble, learn it, use it. However, some things don't work. Librarians solve the physical problem of arranging books on shelves. On the internet, there is no shelf. Clay Shirky wrote about it. Learn, borrow, be humble, and break the rules when fit.
And thank you very much. We've actually nailed the time that we want, but this is by no means an end of the conversation. Please continue it in the hallways, continue in the discussion rooms, but for right now, we're going to give the room up for the next presentation. And thank you very much. Could we get another round of applause for the speaker before we step out? Enjoy.